Chapter 1: The Enigma of Harlem. In the vibrant heart of Harlem during its Renaissance, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson emerged as a figure cloaked in both fear and admiration. His story is not just one of crime, but also of community, making him a complex character in Harlem's history. Johnson, born in Charleston but who made his mark in Harlem, navigated the tumultuous world of the New York underworld to become a legend. His early life hinted at the duality of his character, a feared mobster who also played the role of Harlem's benefactor. Chapter 2: Beginnings in Charleston and Harlem. Bumpy Johnson's journey from Charleston to the bustling streets of Harlem was a transformative one. Born in the South, where segregation and the echoes of slavery still shaped daily life, Johnson's early years were steeped in the harsh realities of African-American existence in the early 20th century. His nickname, Bumpy, was a reference to a bump on the back of his head, but it would come to signify the rough road he would travel in life. Moving north during the Great Migration, like many African Americans seeking a respite from the institutionalized racism of the South, Johnson arrived in Harlem. This New York City neighborhood was in the midst of a cultural reawakening, but beneath the vibrancy and the jazz, there was a pulsating underworld of crime. It was here that Johnson found his calling. His early entanglement with crime began as a means of survival. Harlem was teeming with illegal opportunities, and a young man with Johnson's wit and nerve could find his niche. While history often glosses over his formative years, it is said that Johnson's intelligence and charisma were evident from the start. He had a natural inclination for numbers and strategy, skills that would serve him well in the underworld. His first forays into crime were minor but increasingly lucrative, involving gambling and the numbers game, a form of illegal lottery that was popular in African American communities. Chapter 3: The Queen's Right Hand. Bumpy Johnson's ascent in Harlem's underworld was not a solitary endeavor. It was alongside the formidable Madame Stephanie St. Clair that he carved his name into the annals of crime lore. St. Clair, a Caribbean immigrant, had established herself as a significant force in the lucrative numbers racket in Harlem. Her defiance against the mafia's attempts to horn in on her operations marked her as both a target and a beacon of resistance within the community. Bumpy Johnson, with his keen strategic mind and unyielding loyalty, became her fierce ally and protector. During the tumultuous Harlem numbers wars, Johnson's valor was unmistakable. His confrontations with Dutch Schultz's men were not just skirmishes over turf, but symbolic battles for the control and dignity of Harlem's black populace. A story that captures the essence of Johnson's daring during this period involves a direct and brazen daylight assault on one of Schultz's operations. Unafraid and resolute, Johnson led his men into the fray, fully aware that his actions could spark an all-out war or end his life. Yet, it was this very audacity that solidified his status and made clear that Bumpy Johnson was not a man to be trifled with. The relationship between Johnson and St. Clair went beyond mere business. It was rooted in mutual respect and a shared vision for Harlem. His loyalty was never more evident than when Schultz, sensing an opportunity, attempted to coerce Johnson into betrayal. Johnson's refusal, even in the face of potential profit and power, spoke volumes. Instead of yielding, Johnson intensified his efforts, waging a guerrilla war against Schultz's encroachment, making it clear that loyalty to his own and to Harlem was paramount over any personal gain. In these formative years, Johnson didn't just rise to power, he rose to become a symbol of resistance, a man who, despite his chosen path of crime, represented a form of justice for those who felt powerless against the tidal wave of organized crime. It was this chapter that laid the foundation for Johnson's eventual reign as the Godfather of Harlem, a title that he would hold with an iron grip tempered by a sense of responsibility to those under his sway. Chapter 4. Chess Movies with Lucky Luciano Bumpy. Johnson's alliance with Lucky Luciano was another masterstroke that realigned the power structure of the entire neighborhood. Luciano, a titan of organized crime, was not just a contemporary of Johnson's, he was a pivotal figure with whom a rare and influential relationship was forged. This partnership was born out of necessity and mutual respect. As the Prohibition era came to a close, the two men realized that their combined forces could rule the streets more effectively than any bloody rivalry would allow. Johnson's ability to navigate the complicated social and political landscape of Harlem, paired with Luciano's resources and connections, created a formidable front. Together, they commanded the underground with a silent nod and a handshake, making deals that would ripple through the streets and backrooms of Harlem. In the quiet corners of Harlem, away from prying eyes, Johnson and Luciano were known to engage in chess matches. These were more than mere games. They were a cerebral dance between two sharp minds, each move a metaphor for the strategic maneuvers they orchestrated in the real world. Johnson, with his calculated plays, demonstrated his intellectual prowess, while Luciano's counterplays echoed his adaptability and foresight. Their chess games became a symbol of their partnership, two kings in a game that was much larger than the board before them. The alliance promised an end to the chaotic skirmishes that had plagued their community, and with Johnson at the helm, a sense of order was restored. It was an era where the silent whispers of power spoke volumes, and where Johnson's reign signified not just dominance, but a certain peace brokered among the underworld's echelons. Chapter 5. The Harlem Robin Hood. Bumpy Johnson's reign over Harlem was characterized not only by his criminal activities, but also by a surprising altruism that earned him the moniker of Robin Hood of Harlem. His benevolence was as much a part of his legacy as his notoriety. Johnson's charitable acts served as a bridge between his world of organized crime and his genuine concern for the well-being of the Harlem community. During the Thanksgiving holidays, Johnson was known for his turkey giveaways, ensuring that the less fortunate families could enjoy a festive meal. These acts of kindness were not merely for show, they reflected a deep-seated belief that his prosperity should be shared with the neighborhood that crowned him king. It was common to see lines of grateful residents outside the spots where Johnson distributed his Thanksgiving largesse, a scene that added a complex layer to the tapestry of his life's narrative. Christmas in Harlem was a particularly special time, thanks to Johnson's legendary parties. These weren't just lavish affairs, they were a staple of the community calendar, where Johnson played the role of benefactor and host, giving out gifts and spreading cheer. These gatherings were emblematic of his dual identity, a feared mob boss who could command respect with a stern look, and yet, in the same breath, extend a hand of generosity. The multifaceted nature of Johnson's personality was exemplified when he met a group of young people on the streets of Harlem. Rather than recruiting them into his criminal enterprise, Johnson would offer them advice, urging them to stay in school and pursue legitimate careers. He was known to say that the smartest move they could make was to get an education, a sentiment that seemed at odds with his underworld status, but spoke volumes about his vision for a better Harlem. Chapter 6. The Alcatraz Years and a Changed Harlem Bumpy. Johnson's final years were a testament to the turbulent times he lived in and the changing tides of Harlem. His imprisonment at Alcatraz on drug charges was a significant chapter in his life, signaling a temporary end to his active leadership in Harlem's underworld. However, his influence never waned. Behind bars, his name still commanded respect, and his network continued to operate. His time in Alcatraz was reflective of the era's harsh stance on crime, particularly narcotics, which were beginning to plague urban communities. Upon his release, Johnson returned to a Harlem that was drastically different from the one he had once controlled. The streets where he had been a Robin Hood figure were now being ravaged by the very drugs that he had once dealt. The neighborhood faced economic decline and social upheaval, challenging Johnson's ability to adapt and reassert his influence. An anecdote that highlights the depth of Johnson's character during these trying times involves his interaction with Malcolm X. The two had developed a mutual respect, rooted in their shared concern for the plight of African Americans. Johnson admired Malcolm X's dedication to civil rights and his ability to mobilize the community for social change. This respect was reciprocal. Malcolm X saw in Johnson a figure of substantial influence, one who could potentially sway the course of the neighborhood's future. Their relationship was complex, navigating the spaces between the criminal world and the burgeoning civil rights movement. Johnson's concern for his community's struggle against systemic injustices was evident in his willingness to support Malcolm X's efforts. It's said that Johnson offered Malcolm X protection at rallies, not as a crime boss to a civil leader, but from one Harlem icon to another, recognizing the importance of the fight for equality. These final years solidified Johnson's legacy as a figure who transcended his criminal roots to touch upon the broader social narrative of the time. His life was a mirror to the tumultuous era he lived in, reflecting the challenges and changes that Harlem underwent during the mid-20th century. Chapter 7. The Final Curtain. Bumpy Johnson's demise came abruptly on the evening of July 7, 1968. After enjoying a meal at Wells' restaurant in Harlem, a simple dish of chicken leg, grits, and a cup of coffee, Johnson was seized by a fatal heart attack. The restaurant, a popular spot known for its soul food and the camaraderie of its patrons, was the unexpected backdrop for the end of an era. The news of Johnson's death reverberated through Harlem, signaling the passing of a figure whose influence had shaped the neighborhood for decades. In the immediate aftermath, there was a palpable void in Harlem. Johnson had been a constant presence, a figure who had navigated the complexities of life with a unique blend of ruthlessness and benevolence. His funeral was a convergence of mourners from all walks of life, family, friends, associates from the criminal world, and those from the community who had felt his generosity. Reflecting on Johnson's legacy is to grapple with a tapestry of contrasting narratives. On one hand, he was a criminal mastermind, a man whose name was synonymous with the underworld activities that both plagued and sustained Harlem. On the other, he was seen as a community leader, a protector of the neighborhood, and a man who used his ill-gotten gains to feed, educate, and inspire those less fortunate. In death as in life, Bumpy Johnson is a figure shrouded in mystique, commanding attention and challenging us to understand the enigmatic nature of his influence on Harlem and the broader American narrative. Chapter 8. The Complexity of Legacy. In considering the full measure of his life, we are invited to reflect on the duality that defines not only Johnson, but many historical figures who have walked the line between infamy and adoration. His story prompts us to look beyond the surface and to understand the profound impact he had on the people and the place he dominated. Johnson was a man who lived by the sword, yet also sought to shield his community from the very violence that underpinned his power. As we conclude our journey through Bumpy Johnson's life, let's ponder the complexities of such a figure. Can one reconcile the deeds of the criminal with the actions of the benefactor? How do we weigh the contributions against the crimes? Johnson's story, like many before and after him, challenges us to grapple with these questions, to understand the human capacity for both darkness and light. We reflect on the enduring shadows cast by figures like Bumpy Johnson. They remind us that history is not merely black and white, but is often shaded in grey. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of one of Harlem's most enigmatic figures. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the captivating tales of history's most compelling personalities.